The steel gate closed behind him with a dull thud, a sound that seemed to seal more than just a building. It sealed 13 years of isolation, anger, silence, and nights spent staring at the ceiling, trying to remember who he was before his cell. The noise echoed inside him like bottled thunder. Elijah Monroe was free, but not whole. He stood still for a few seconds, as if waiting for someone to call his name. But no one did. The morning wind passed over him with the same indifference it had passed through the bars all those years ago. 41 years of life, 13 spent behind the filthy walls of a state penitentiary. 17 tattoos scattered across his body, each marking a moment when the pain was more bearable than the silence. And one crime. One single night that redefined everything. Elijah didn't consider himself a murderer, but he also knew that that night he could have been. A stupid argument in a bar, a push, a broken bottle, an unconscious man on the floor. And he, with his fists covered in blood, unable to explain why he felt that momentary pleasure of seeing someone weaker than him. Convicted of assault with intent to kill. In prison, he became the brute in the first few months. Someone no one dared to provoke. Hatred was a shelter, and strength a language that everyone understood. But something in him changed after the third Christmas, without letters. After his mother died without seeing him. After an old blind librarian put a book in his hands and said, "You are still capable of starting over, even if it is only here inside." He read. Stumbling, yes, but he read. And then he began to write. Diaries, letters he never sent, requests for forgiveness that he knew no one would answer. He cried in secret, he prayed quietly, and he learned to be silent in a way that no one else has learned. Now outside, freedom had a metallic taste, a cold taste. He had hoped that day would be different, but it was as if the world were saying, "You paid your sentence." But the debt to life, no one forgives that. The asphalt seemed wider than before. The cars were faster, the faces were more hurried. He looked at each bus window, hoping to find a familiar look, but all he saw was strangeness. Some recognized him. He knew the way they quickly lowered their eyes gave away more than any words. In his backpack, the state had given him the basics: a toothbrush, a prepaid card, and a pamphlet with the words "social reintegration" in letters that were too big, as if they were shouting at him. He walked through streets he no longer remembered. Every corner seemed to carry a ghost. The barber shop where he got his hair cut before his meetings, closed. The little market where his mother bought cigarettes and chatted with the owner, now an automated laundromat. Time had passed, but not for him. Elijah was a forgotten photograph in an album of living people. The shelter was almost 40 minutes away, but he needed to walk, feel the ground, breathe, try to understand if the world still had a place for him. He passed teenagers with headphones in their ears, women with grocery bags. No one really saw him, but he saw everything with an intensity that only someone who has been imprisoned can feel. The freedom was frightening. Every corner hid too many possibilities. And he, who had spent 13 years being controlled in everything, when to eat, when to sleep, when to speak, now found himself faced with too many choices. That was when he heard it. A sharp, fragile sound, out of rhythm with the rest of the world. A cry. At first he thought it was all in his head, an echo of a memory. But there, between the walls of a narrow alley, there was something or someone crying. Elijah's body froze. The sound was high-pitched, like a wounded animal. But there was something different, something human. He took a step, then another. The alley was dark, dirty, with piles of trash bags and crushed cans. And there, between two cardboard boxes, was something that made no sense at all. A blanket, small, hastily wrapped, and inside it a pair of frightened eyes, still wet from having just arrived in the world. A baby. Elijah knelt down slowly, as if he were about to detonate a bomb. The baby looked at him, its mouth half open and its cheeks red from the cold. It wasn't crying anymore, it was just watching, as if it too was trying to understand what had happened. Elijah's heart raced. He didn't know what to do with children. He had never had children. He barely knew how to take care of himself. But something in him, maybe something forgotten, buried, was ignited. A memory, an instinct, guilt. He reached out slowly and touched the blanket. It was cold. The baby moved silently, without fear. Elijah looked around, expecting to see someone running. His mother, a police officer, anything, nothing, just him, and that fragile life that someone had decided to abandon. He thought about leaving. Elijah had seen things, knives buried in ribs during a card game, men breaking under the weight of their own pasts. He'd watched life fade from someone's eyes once, slowly, like a light bulb dying. And yet, nothing had ever shaken him like the sound he heard now, a baby crying alone, in a city that had forgotten how to care. It was a thin, high-pitched wail, not loud, not yet, but urgent in a way that twisted something inside him. The kind of cry that didn't belong here, among dumpsters and cracked concrete. The kind of cry that made you stop breathing without realizing. Elijah stood still, his boots rooted to the sidewalk. He looked down the alley where the sound came from. Darkness, litter, flickering streetlight at the far end. No movement, just that cry, stretching out like a thread, pulling him towards something he didn't ask for. His hands clenched. This had to be a mistake. A recording, maybe. A prank. People did that now, right? Played sounds to bait someone, trap them. But no, this was real. There was life in that cry. There was need, and there was no one else around. Elijah hesitated, not out of fear, but from something worse, memory. He had been the one people warned their children about. He had been the man in the shadows. What if someone saw him near a baby? What if this was exactly the kind of situation that would undo the thin thread of freedom he'd just been handed? But the cry came again. Sharper now, no time left. He stepped into the alley. Each footfall echoed strangely, the sound absorbed by the damp walls and piles of trash. He moved slowly, eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, like he used to walk the prison yard when things felt wrong. Then he saw it. Between two moldy cardboard boxes, the kind used for shipping bulk liquor, was a small bundle. A blanket, blue and frayed, wrapped around a shape too small to be anything else. Elijah crouched, his knees cracked under the unfamiliar pressure. He reached out, one hand trembling slightly. He hadn't touched something this fragile in, maybe ever. The baby was maybe a few days old. Tiny, red-faced, mouth open, but now silent, as if it had used up all its energy, calling for someone who never came. Its eyes fluttered, dark and confused, and met Elijah's. He froze. That look, it wasn't fear, it was trust, blind and undeserved. He glanced around again. Still no one. What the hell? He muttered under his breath. Then he heard it, a sudden clatter of a metal can rolling in the wind. His heart jumped. If someone saw him now, a recently released ex-con holding an abandoned baby in a dark alley, how would that look? He could hear the sirens already, see the headlines. Former inmate caught near infant in alley. He stood quickly, then immediately regretted it. The baby stirred, letting out a weak, high-pitched cry. No, he couldn't just leave it there. But he also couldn't stay, couldn't call the cops. Not now, not here. They'd ask questions he didn't have answers for. They wouldn't see what he was doing. They'd see who was doing it. He had to decide, fast. There were two paths. Walk away and pretend he never saw it. Or pick it up and do something stupid, something right. His stomach turned. His breath came shallow. Then he reached down and picked up the baby. The bundle was lighter than expected, but alive, so unmistakably alive it made his arm shake. The baby whimpered once, then quieted. Maybe it recognized safety, or maybe it was just tired. But Elijah felt it, something shifting inside him, something primal, protective. He walked back out into the street, holding the child close, trying not to look like a kidnapper. "Okay," he muttered, voice dry. "Okay, think." The hospital? Too far. He didn't even have a phone. The shelter? It would be closed at this hour, and they'd never let him in carrying a child like this. He thought about the fire stations, the safe haven laws. You could leave a baby there, no questions asked. But this didn't feel like that. This wasn't about dropping off. Something in him knew that leaving the baby again would be like leaving himself behind, the version of him that could still become someone else. Still, he needed to make a move. Every minute he stood there increased the chance of being seen, being judged, being arrested. Then he saw a small bodega down the block. Lights on, maybe 24 hours. He pulled the hood of his sweatshirt over his head, tucked the baby tighter, and walked fast. Inside, the place was quiet. A man behind the counter, half asleep, barely looked up. Elijah grabbed a can of baby formula and a pack of disposable bottles. Diapers, too. Smallest size. He dropped them on the counter. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "You got a kid?" he asked casually. Elijah didn't answer, just reached into his pocket and placed a crumpled 20 on the counter. The clerk shrugged, rang it up, and bagged the items. "Good luck, man," he muttered. Back on the street, Elijah ducked into a closed cafe's covered entryway. He sat, legs stretched out, the baby in his lap. He poured formula into one of the bottles with shaking hands, screwed the lid tight, and offered it. The baby took it, hesitantly at first, then with growing need. Elijah watched, stunned. He had fed another human being. He, Elijah Monroe, the man who couldn't even take care of himself, had kept something alive for another night. A strange warmth bloomed in his chest. Not joy, not yet, but something close, something like a heartbeat he thought had gone cold a long time ago. The city woke up slow, like someone who had slept too hard and wasn't ready to face the morning. Streetlights dimmed, garbage trucks groaned through narrow alleys. People emerged from cracked apartment doors with coffee cups and tired eyes. Elijah hadn't slept. He was still tucked inside the narrow entryway of the closed cafe, the baby cradled against his chest, inside a coat he had found abandoned beside a dumpster. All night, he'd sat there, listening to every sound, heart pounding every time a siren echoed in the distance. But the baby, still unnamed, had finally slept, curled in, quiet, trusting. And somehow, that trust kept Elijah awake. He stared down now at the small face, peaceful, warm against the cold city air. It didn't make sense. Why would someone leave something this small, this defenseless, in a cardboard box? Was it fear, addiction, desperation, or worse, complete indifference? He didn't know. He couldn't imagine. He'd made mistakes, sure, hurt people, lost himself in his own rage. But he couldn't have. Elijah shook the thought from his head. The baby stirred, letting out a small grunt. Elijah shifted slightly, wincing at the stiffness in his legs. 13 years on a prison mattress, and this damn concrete still hurt more. He needed a plan. He had fed the baby, formula bought in haste. The bottle was half empty now, sitting beside a crumpled brown bag. There were diapers, sure, but he didn't know how to change one. He'd watched enough in prison, other inmates talking about their kids. But doing it, with real, tiny legs and fragile skin, that was different. Elijah had lived most of his life making decisions in split seconds, punch or don't, speak or stay silent, but this was different. This decision needed something else. Heart. He looked up. The streets were beginning to buzz. He couldn't stay there, not much longer. Part of him still screamed to find the nearest station, hand the baby over, walk away before things spiraled, because they would spiral. He knew how fast that could happen. But another part, a part he hadn't trusted in years, said maybe he was meant to find that box. Maybe this wasn't just a tragedy. Maybe this was the beginning of something he never expected to be part of, a reason, a purpose. He hadn't believed in signs, not for a long time. But last night, that cry had reached a part of him that prison never managed to kill. And here he was. He looked down at the child again. "Guess we're both just left behind, huh?" he whispered. The baby didn't answer, of course. But something about that silence was sacred. He reached for the diaper bag and tried to remember what the guys in his cell block used to say. Tabs in the back, clean cloth under the legs, wipe front to back. He laid the baby on his coat. His hands shook. The baby wriggled, made a face, but didn't cry. One step at a time. By the end of it, he was sweating, but the baby was dry and warm and still alive. That was something. Elijah felt a strange, absurd burst of pride. For years, his hands had only taken things, hit things, hurt things. Now, they were doing the opposite. He picked the baby up and cradled him against his chest again. People were walking by now, rushing past. Some glanced at him, most didn't care. A man with a baby in a coat didn't mean much in a city like this. And that, for now, was good. He started walking, not toward the halfway house, not toward the fire station, just forward. As he passed by the alley where he had found the baby, he stopped. He stepped in, looked at the cardboard box again. Still there, damp, collapsed, no notes, no clues. Just a few cigarette butts and the crumpled remains of whatever hope had once been wrapped in that blue blanket. He kneeled and pressed his hand to the box. There was something about honoring the moment, the place. "This is where I changed," he whispered. He stood up and walked away. Not fast, not slow, just enough to feel the weight of every step. Elijah kept walking, not because he had a destination, but because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant panic. The baby was asleep again, curled tight against his chest, wrapped in layers of cloth and caution. Every corner, every passing car, every glance from a stranger triggered alarms in his head. He didn't belong here. Some part of him, the old part, the survival-trained part, screamed to ditch everything, find a quiet spot, leave the baby somewhere safe, anonymous, legal. That way, he wouldn't get blamed, wouldn't go back. Because that was the real fear, wasn't it? Not the judgment, the smell of bleach and piss, the clank of keys. The sound of your name called like it didn't belong to you anymore. He couldn't go back. A cop car rolled by, slowly, windows up, just cruising. Elijah tensed, turned his back, held the baby tighter. The car kept going, didn't stop. He ducked into a convenience store, grabbed another bottle of water. This time, he noticed the security camera above the counter. He made himself small, quick. Back on the street, the noise was louder now. The city had fully woken up. School buses, horns, sirens in the distance. But for Elijah, it all felt off-kilter, like he was balancing on a wire no one else could see. He found an alley behind an old laundromat and sat. The baby stirred, but didn't wake. Elijah pressed his palms to his face. He hadn't cried in years. Even last night, in that moment of helplessness, the tears had come fast and burned out just as quickly. Now, he was just tiring, he muttered. There was no plan, no logic. A voice inside that said, "Don't give up on this." But another voice, louder, colder, whispered, "You're not the hero. You're not the guy who gets redemption. You're the warning in someone else's story." He looked at the baby again. Quiet. Too quiet. "Hey," Elijah whispered, brushing the baby's cheek with the back of his finger. "You okay?" No reaction. He leaned in closer. The baby's chest rose, but barely. He unwrapped a layer of blanket. The baby's skin felt cold. lips slightly pale. No, no, no. Was he starving the kid by feeding the wrong thing? This wasn't a game anymore. He had no choice now. He stood fast, the adrenaline kicking in like it used to when fights broke out in the yard. He had to get help, real help. Past a kid on a bike who swerved out of his way. He saw it, a pharmacy with a neon cross glowing red in the morning light. He pushed through the door, straight to the counter. A woman in a white coat looked up. "I need help," he said, breath ragged. "It's a baby. I found him. He's not breathing right." She blinked, stood up. "Did you say I didn't take him?" Elijah snapped. "I swear to God, I found him last night, in a box." Her eyes flicked to the bundle in his arms. She stepped closer, trained gaze, steady hands. "Bring him back here," she said, pointing toward a small office in the back. Elijah followed, sat when she told him to, watched her unwrap the baby with practiced calm. She touched the baby's neck, lifted the eyelids, listened with a stethoscope. "He's cold," she said, "and he needs fluids, but he's alive." Elijah exhaled, chest caving. The woman looked at him. Hard. "You need to call this in." "I can't." "You have to. I've been out 2 days. They'll never believe me." The silence between them was thick. She looked down at the baby, then at him. Finally, she said, "There's a clinic 2 blocks east. No questions. They'll stabilize him. Then we'll see." Elijah nodded, stood slowly. She rewrapped the baby, tighter this time, and handed him back. "Go now," she said, "before I change my mind." He ran again. The city blurred. Nothing else mattered. He reached the clinic. A faded red door with a buzzer. He pressed it. A man opened, older, kind eyes. Elijah didn't explain, just handed the baby over with shaking hands and said, "Please, just help him." And then he backed away. Down the steps, into the light. He didn't wait to be thanked, didn't wait to be blamed. He walked until his legs gave out, sat on the curb, and wept. Not because he was afraid anymore, but because for the first time in years he had chosen not to run. The clinic didn't ask questions. They took the baby, wrapped him in warm blankets, and moved with a kind of urgency that told Elijah he had done the right thing. He waited in the hallway for a few minutes, then quietly slipped out. Not because he was running, not this time, but because he knew how fragile his position was. Too many eyes, too much risk. His feet ached, his stomach growled, his mind spun. By early evening, he found himself sitting on a bench outside a community church. He watched people come and go, parents holding toddlers, teens kicking soccer balls, old women with grocery bags too heavy for their frames. None of them knew him. None of them saw the ex-con with a past heavier than any of those bags. To them, he was just another tired man in a hoodie, sitting alone. But invisibility doesn't last long when the past has your name on file. The first cruiser pulled up just as the sun began to dip. Elijah saw it before he heard it. The blue and red lights cutting across the sidewalk like slashes of judgment. He stood slowly, didn't run, didn't flinch. 2 officers stepped out, one young, one older. The older one had that cop face, stone-carved and unimpressed. "Elijah Monroe?" the younger one asked, clipboard in hand. "You mind coming with us? We just have a few questions." He nodded. The station was cold, sterile. They led him to an interview room, small, with a metal table, 2 chairs and a camera blinking red in the corner. He sat. "You want to tell me why you walked into a clinic this morning with an abandoned infant and then disappeared?" Elijah rubbed his face. "I didn't walk into it. I handed the baby off at the door. He needed help. I found him last night, in a box." The cop didn't blink. "You expect me to believe that?" "It's the truth. You didn't take the baby from anyone?" "No." "You sure about that? Would I really walk into a clinic with a kidnapped kid and then leave him there?" The cop leaned forward. "Actually, yeah. That's exactly what someone does when they panic, or when they want to play the hero." Elijah's jaw tightened. He kept his hands flat on the table. "I spent 13 years locked up," he said slowly. "You think I'd risk all that to snatch a baby off the street?" The cop stood and paced. "You know how this looks, right? You, a convicted felon, with a baby, alone, no witnesses, no report, just you showing up out of nowhere." "I didn't show up. I did what I had to do. And then ran. I didn't run. You didn't stay." Elijah looked him dead in the eyes. "Because people like you don't listen. You see my file, not me." The cop paused. That hit. Not enough to soften him, but enough to shift something. He sat back down, flipped a page. "The baby's stable," he said. "No signs of injury, no trauma. But he was severely dehydrated, malnourished, cold." Elijah swallowed hard. He didn't realize how tight his chest had been until those words hit. He had saved him, really saved him. "So what happens now?" he asked. "We investigate." "You gonna charge me with something?" "Depends." "On what?" "On whether your story holds up." Silence again. Then, finally, the door opened. A woman stepped in. Plain clothes, tired eyes, not a uniform. She introduced herself as Detective Lorne, said she was with Family Services working alongside PD. "I spoke to the pharmacist," she said, "and the doctor at the clinic. Both said you acted like someone trying to help." Elijah looked at her, unsure whether that was a lifeline or a setup. "I also pulled your file," she added. "Of course you did. You were convicted at 28. No priors, no incidents inside after the second year. Early release for good behavior. Is this the part where you say people don't change?" She didn't smile, but she didn't look cruel. "This is the part where I say, sometimes they do. But the system isn't built to believe that." She sat down across from him. "Tell me everything, from the start." And he did. He told her about the prison gate, the alley, the cardboard box, the tiny cry, the decision not to walk away, the pharmacy, the bottle, the fear. He told her more than he meant to, about the guilt, the years lost, the part of him that didn't believe he deserved a second chance. She listened, didn't interrupt, just took notes and nodded. When he finished, the room felt quieter, like the air had stopped holding its breath. She stood, gathered her file. "I don't know where this goes yet," she said, "but for what it's worth, I believe you." Elijah looked up, and for the first time in years, he felt something real, relief, not freedom, but something like hope. Elijah didn't sleep that night, even after they let him go. Detective Lorne said the investigation would continue, that he might still face questions, but for now, he was free to leave. "Don't leave town," she'd added, like it was a cliché from a bad movie. But Elijah didn't laugh, because for the first time since walking out of prison, he wasn't thinking about escape. He was thinking about the baby. He didn't know his name, didn't know if he'd been given one, didn't even know what the nurses were calling him now. Infant Doe. Probably. Another file, another number. But to Elijah, he wasn't a case. He was a heartbeat, a memory burned into his arms, the weight of him, the warmth, the quiet trust that had changed something Elijah didn't know was still alive. And that was the problem. He couldn't stop seeing him, hearing that cry, feeling that fragile chest rise and fall against his own. So the next morning, Elijah did something that didn't make sense. He went back, not to the alley, not to the cafe stoop where he spent the night with the baby tucked into his coat. He went to the clinic. The red door still looked faded, but now it felt different, like the beginning of something instead of the edge of a mistake. He pressed the buzzer, waited. The same man from before opened the door. Older, quiet, a warmth in his eyes that didn't ask questions. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Elijah said quickly. I need to know if he's okay." The man paused, then nodded. "Come in." The room smelled of antiseptic and something soft, maybe baby powder. Elijah followed the man down a narrow hall to a small recovery room with pastel-painted walls and a crib near the window. There he was, smaller than Elijah remembered. Or maybe it was just that the moment made him feel huge in comparison. He was sleeping. Blanket tucked around him, tiny fists balled near his face. "He's stable now," the man said. "They gave him fluids. He was cold, but he's gaining color. Appetite's back. He's a fighter." Elijah nodded, throat tight. "Can I?" The man hesitated, then stepped aside. Elijah approached slowly, kneeling next to the crib like it was an altar. The baby stirred at the sound of his boots, opened his eyes, and then, impossibly, smiled. Not a full smile, not a knowing one. Just that little reflex babies have when they see a face that feels safe. Elijah reached in, one finger extended. The baby grabbed it, held on, like he remembered, like he knew. And in that second, something inside Elijah clicked into place. It wasn't about what made sense anymore, wasn't about what was safe or legal or clean. It was about that grip, that tiny hand wrapped around the last piece of a man who'd been broken too many times. "They're calling Child Protective Services today," the man said gently behind him. "He'll be placed somewhere safe, hopefully with a foster family until things settle." Elijah didn't answer, couldn't. "What you did," the man added, "was the right thing. But it's not your job to carry him now." Elijah stood slowly, looked back at the crib. "Maybe it is," he whispered. The man shook his head, not in judgment, in sorrow. "You barely got your life back. You have nothing to offer a child." And maybe that was true. But Elijah also knew this. When he had nothing, no home, no hope, no one, that baby had looked at him like he mattered, like he was something. And now, even if the whole system told him to let go, even if it made him a fool or a failure, he had to try. He stepped outside into the daylight, the city alive again, cars honking, children yelling, dogs barking, life moving forward. But Elijah stood still. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled pamphlet from the halfway house. On the back, someone had written a number. Legal aid, free consultation. He took a deep breath and dialed. Elijah had never held something that fragile, not in prison, not in life. Maybe that was the difference. Everything else in his world had always been rough. Iron bars, stone walls, bruised knuckles, thick skin. But this little being wrapped in cotton and trust. It was terrifying. He sat in a small room at the back of the clinic, not much bigger than a storage closet, but it might as well have been a cathedral. Because here, silence was sacred. Because here, something was happening that had never happened to him before. Someone depended on him. The nurse handed him the baby gently, guiding Elijah's arms with quiet confidence. He followed her movements, awkward but careful. "Support the head," she said softly. He nodded. His hands were shaking, not from fear of the baby, but from the fear of breaking this moment, of not being enough. The baby opened his eyes, slowly blinking up at Elijah, like the world was just now beginning to make sense again. Elijah felt something catch in his throat, something old, something raw. The nurse placed a warm bottle in his hand. "He's hungry," she said. "It's time." Elijah looked at it like it was a live wire. "How do I?" "Just tilt it. Let him find it. Don't force." He brought the bottle closer, trying to steady his hands. The baby's lips latched, instinctive and eager. A soft suckling sound filled the room. It was quiet, so quiet. But in Elijah's chest, it roared. He had thrown punches that silenced rooms. But this silenced him. His hands trembled at first, then slowly steadied. One hand cradled the baby's head, the other held the bottle. He watched every movement, each twitch of the mouth, each breath. Nothing else existed. Not the past, not the system, not the label of ex-con. Only this moment. Only this miracle. "You're doing fine," the nurse said from the corner. "He's calm, that's a good sign." Elijah didn't respond right away. His throat felt thick. "I didn't think I could," he said eventually, his voice a low rasp. "I thought I'd screw it up." "Most people feel that way the first time." "Yeah," he murmured, eyes still locked on the baby. "But most people get a second time." The nurse said nothing, but her silence wasn't empty. It was permission. Permission to feel what needed to be felt. The baby finished the bottle slowly, slowing to lazy pulls and finally stopping, satisfied. Elijah pulled the bottle away and stared at it, half full, warm, still held like it was made of glass. "Now what?" he asked, nervous again. "Time to burp him," she said, "gently, over your shoulder or across your arm." He chose the shoulder. It felt more like something a father would do. He adjusted the baby, heart pounding at every movement, patted softly, then a little firmer. A small burp escaped the baby's lips. He blinked, content. Elijah laughed, not loudly but with his whole chest. It was the kind of laugh that comes when your heart cracks open a little and light leaks in. The nurse smiled. "There you go." He looked at her, eyes glassy. I don't know. I didn't know I could feel this." She nodded. "That's how you know it's real." After a while, the nurse stepped out to give him space. Elijah sat there, holding the baby against his chest, eyes closed, breathing in the smell of warm milk and laundry soap. "You don't know me," he whispered to the child. "You don't know what I've done, who I used to be." The baby stirred, shifting closer into his neck. "But you're not afraid." He paused, swallowing hard. "They'll probably take you away, put you somewhere safe with someone better." He pulled the baby back, looked into his small, blinking eyes. "But if there's a way, any way at all, I want to stay. I want to try." A long silence followed. The baby yawned. Elijah smiled. "You tired already? We just got started." The nurse returned after a while, clipboard in hand. "We'll be transferring him to a foster facility tonight." Elijah felt it like a blow, a quiet punch to the ribs. He nodded, tried not to let his face betray too much. "But," she added, "family services said they were open to visitation, if you want to stay involved." His eyes snapped up. "What does that mean?" "It means they're watching. They know what you did, and they're not turning their backs yet." He breathed slowly, heavily. "I'll be back tomorrow." She nodded. "We'll be here." The waiting room at Child Protective Services smelled like stale coffee and paper. Elijah sat in a cracked plastic chair, bouncing his knee. A TV on the wall played a muted cartoon. A mother across from him juggled a crying toddler and a phone call, her voice rising and falling in practiced chaos. He didn't belong here, but he didn't belong anywhere else either. He had called the number from the flyer. They told him to come in, to talk things through, to be evaluated, whatever that meant. The woman who finally called his name looked younger than he expected, early 30s, with short clipped speech and a tablet under her arm. "Mr. Monroe, follow me." She didn't offer a smile. The office was cleaner than the waiting room. Neutral colors, a bookshelf full of government pamphlets, a photo of a dog framed on her desk, the only personal thing in sight. She gestured to a chair, sat behind her desk, tapped her screen. "So," she began, "you want custody of the infant you brought to the clinic?" Elijah cleared his throat. "I want to help. I don't know what that means legally, but I want to be there for him." She nodded, not looking up. "Have you ever parented before?" "No." "Do you have any children of your own?" "No." "Employment?" "Not yet." "Stable housing?" He hesitated. "Temporary, halfway house." That made her pause. "Mr. Monroe, do you understand what's required to qualify as a guardian in this state? I'm not trying to lie to you. She held up a hand. I believe you, I do, and I understand your intentions. But you need to understand, custody isn't about good intentions. It's about capacity. I can learn, he said quickly. I can do whatever it takes. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for a shot. She finally looked him in the eye. I read your file. Of course you did. I read your release statement, your correctional history, your psychological evaluations. You've done the work. And I respect that. A pause. But that word again, the one that always came after hope. But the department can't place an infant into the custody of a recent parolee with no income, no stable housing, and a violent felony on record. He looked down. It wasn't a surprise, but it still hurt like one. What happens to him now? Elijah asked. He'll be placed in a foster home. A good one if we're lucky. Infant placements are usually prioritized. And then, if the biological parents aren't located, and if no extended family comes forward, we start looking at adoption pathways. Can I visit him? She hesitated again. That's not standard. I'm not standard, he said. You said yourself, I brought him in, I saved him. Doesn't that count for something? It counts, she said softly. It just doesn't change the law. He stood, restless, pacing the small office. I know what I am. I know what I did. But he didn't cry when I held him. He looked at me like I was safe. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. She swallowed, caught off guard. He stepped closer, not threatening, just real. You think I'm dangerous. But that baby, he made me dangerous to anything that would hurt him. A silence stretched between them. Then she looked back at her tablet. There's one thing, she said slowly. A supervised visitation program. It's usually for relatives, but I might be able to make a case. He nodded. Yes, anything. I'll need to submit a formal request, background check, updated records, psych eval. I'll do all of it. She tapped a few things. You'll hear back in a few days, maybe a week. A week, he said, voice cracking. He'll forget me in a week. She didn't answer. Outside, the city kept moving, but Elijah didn't. He stood on the sidewalk, fists in his pockets, heart hammering. The system had spoken, and it said no. But inside him, something else said, not yet. Elijah didn't hear the knock at first. It was late, nearly midnight, and the hallway of the halfway house was quiet except for the occasional hum of pipes and the muffled snore from the room next door. He sat on the edge of his bed, reading the same line from a letter he'd never send. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm trying. Then came the knock. 3 short raps. Familiar. Too familiar. He opened the door slowly. There, leaning against the frame like a memory in jeans and leather, was Marcus Smoke DeWitt. Same eyes, same grin, different time. L, Marcus said, voice low. Damn, look at you. Elijah didn't smile. What the hell are you doing here? Marcus shrugged like they were back on the street corner in Old 3. Heard you were out. Figured I'd stop by, see for myself. Why? Marcus stepped in without being invited, looked around the small room. This where the state parks you these days? He said. Cozy. Elijah shut the door behind him. I asked you a question. Marcus turned to face him, smirk fading just a little. I heard about the baby, man. Word gets around, even in the shadows. Elijah's body tensed. What about it? Relax, Marcus said. Ain't here to stir it. Just surprised. You? Playing house? Elijah crossed his arms. I'm not playing anything. I'm trying to do something right for once. Marcus chuckled. That's new. Elijah didn't rise to it. Not this time. I'm not the same, Marcus. You sure? 'Cause from where I stand, you're still here, still broke, still begging the system for scraps. Elijah stepped forward. You should leave. Marcus raised both hands in mock surrender. All right, no beef. Just wanted to say one thing. He pulled a small envelope from his jacket, tossed it on the bed. In case the whole Daddy Elijah gig doesn't pan out, there's a guy down near 3rd, needs muscle, cash up front, no names. Elijah didn't move. Marcus started toward the door. You were always the strong one, he said. Just never figured you'd get soft. The door shut behind him with a quiet click. Elijah stared at the envelope for a long time. He didn't open it, didn't throw it away either. It sat on the bed like a ghost, like a choice. He sat down across from it, hands clenched. The past wasn't done with him. The next morning, he visited the clinic. He held the baby again, fed him, spoke to him like nothing had happened the night before. But something had. There was a weight in his chest he couldn't shake, a doubt that sounded a lot like Marcus's voice. You'll never be more than what you were. But then the baby reached up, little fingers brushing Elijah's jaw. And the voice got quieter. Not gone, but no longer in control. He stood and looked at the nurse. I want to sign up for every program, parenting classes, job placement, whatever it takes. She smiled. That's a long list. He nodded. Then I'd better start now. It wasn't a courtroom, it wasn't a church, but in that cramped social worker ASS office, under fluorescent lights and surrounded by folders full of stories that never ended well, Elijah Monroe made a vow. He sat in a chair too small for his frame, fingers laced tightly in his lap, while Ms. Danner, the same woman who Dee told him no, read over the latest report. Your counselor says you've been consistent, she said. Parenting classes every week, no absences, no incidents. He nodded. Your employer gave you high marks, said you've taken every shift offered, even the late ones. Another nod. You've completed CPR training, you've submitted to every background check, and you've stayed in contact with the child's care team without fail. Elijah took a breath. His chest didn't feel tight anymore. Just ready. So here's where we are, she said, closing the file. The baby, who we've temporarily named Miles, is now eligible for long-term placement. No family has come forward, and we believe continuity is in his best interest. Elijah looked up. She met his eyes. We're recommending you for kinship guardianship. He blinked. Once, twice. You're serious? Yes, supervised at first, but the intent is permanency, with review. His throat tightened. I thought I couldn't. You couldn't, she said, back then, but you didn't stop walking forward. He let the words sit there, soak in. It wasn't absolution, it wasn't forgetting. It was trust, earned. Later that week, he walked into the foster center carrying a new diaper bag, one he'd bought himself, stitched with quiet pride. The social worker walked him to the room. Miles was there, bigger now, smiling. Elijah dropped to his knees and held out his arms. The baby didn't hesitate. Tiny arms reached for him like he was the only world that mattered. Elijah pulled him close, felt the heartbeat. Felt his own sync with it. No blood, no DNA, just choice. And it was enough. That night, Elijah held Miles in his arms as the boy slept, soft breath against his chest. He sat on the edge of his bed in the small apartment he fought to get, the first real space that was his in nearly 2 decades. He looked around, crib in the corner, tiny clothes folded on the chair, a bottle sterilizer buzzing on the kitchen counter. This wasn't how he pictured freedom. It was better. Because this wasn't just freedom from, it was freedom for love, for presence, for future. He kissed the top of the baby's head and whispered, "You weren't a mistake in my story. You are the story. You don't need to share blood to be a father. You don't need to be perfect to be chosen." Elijah wasn't given a second chance by the system. He carved it with his own hands, step by step, bottle by bottle. He didn't run from his past. He stood still long enough to become someone new. And that baby, That baby didn't just save Elijah's heart. He reminded all of us that no one is beyond love, not even the broken. So if you've ever felt like you weren't enough, like your past was too heavy, remember Elijah, because sometimes all it takes is one act of courage to become the person you were always meant to be. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. And tell us in the comments, what moment in your life changed everything?